excited to be back, and if you're watching this and you're like, what does she mean she's back? You guys haven't seen any videos of me since like a month ago, but because I've been uploading a lot of footage because there was a month I filmed so much and I wanted to share with you guys. So the summer is almost over, which means not so much vlogging, but I'll definitely do a update video because there's a lot of exciting things happening that I haven't told you guys about, and I can't wait to show you guys and talk about it and everything. But I was applying for a job yesterday and I was looking through all of my old wrap-up videos and I was like, oh my god, I need to do a summer wrap-up. So as many of you guys know, I was doing a summer reading, which I was gonna do one book review a week as if. Yeah, I totally failed at that, but I did do 5 reviews, which is like half of what I was planning to do, so I still feel kind of successful. And I also uploaded these Booktubeathon vlog readings, which was so much fun. The vlogs were shit, but at least it was kind of like a reading update during the summer. So this is going to be a reading wrap-up. Guys, I read 27 books this summer. Not all of them are considered books. Some are comics, some are poetry books, but they're still books. So I thought I'd do a wrap-up now and talk about it. This is going to be a hell of a long video. But if you want to watch it, then I'm so happy that you guys are going to join me on this wrap-up. Yeah, I'm so excited. So, per usual, my rating is going to be in your right corner, and the Goodreads rating is going to be in the left corner, and they're both out of 5. I'm also very generous with my readings of books, so that's why they're all really high, probably. And yeah, let's just get started. So the first book that I read was The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. This is kind of like a modern classic in a way because it was published in the early 2000s, but it is a very, very special book. It's about this 14-year-old girl, I believe, who's raped and murdered, and then you get her point of view while she's in heaven looking down at her family and explaining what happens afterwards, and she gets to enter every single mind of her family and her friends and also her murderer and kind of just see things evolve through years as her little sister grows up to be older than her. And it's a really, really different but also very good book. There's definitely a rape trigger in this book, and even though it's a 14-year-old girl, it is an adult book, and I really, really enjoyed this book. The next book that I read was King's Cage by Victoria Aveyard. This is the 3rd book in the Red Queen series. I thought this was a trilogy, and then because I really didn't want to continue with this series, but I already bought the 3rd book, and so I was like, you know, might as well read the 3rd book, complete the series. It's gonna be great, just to like have the story wrapped up. And then, at the end of the book, I realized it's gonna be at least another book. So I don't know what I'm gonna do about it. It's very dystopian, there's a lot of war. It's just war, 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 and rebelling, and it's just like, it's so pointless. Like, everything that happens in this book, it's like, it never kind of ends. It's just like an ongoing battle the whole time. I don't even remember what happened in this book, honestly, because it was like 2 months ago, but I remember that I felt kind of disappointed, but there are parts of it that are kind of good too. So I think I'm going to continue with the series anyways because I just hate leaving a series unfinished. I'll update you guys about what happens. The next book that I read was Vicious by V. Schwab. This is the first book that I read by Victoria Schwab, and I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was really clever. It's about these 2 college kids. One of them is going to write their thesis statement on these EOs, or extraordinary people, I think. And so EOs are basically these people who die, and when they come back to life, kind of, you know, when they have a near-death experience, they get this power. And so these 2 friends, they try to like, they get more and more into this idea of EOs, you know, and they kind of obsess over it. Sometimes you get to see the perspective of the past, college, you know, and sometimes you get the perspective of now, like today. And the whole book is kind of leading up to this one point, which I really, really enjoyed. It's a good book. I thought it was a standalone, but it's actually going to be a 2nd book, and I'm really, really excited for it. I highly recommend this book. The next book that I read was The Shining by Stephen King. As you guys can see, I was gonna do a review and I highlighted and made so many notes and I was so excited about it, but I couldn't come up with a good concept of how to review this book because I kept obsessing over the idea that it had to be something special, so I never ended up reviewing it. I really liked this book, but it's a very adult book and it's the first book I read by Stephen King. It's basically about this family, a husband and a wife and a son, and they're going to stay at this hotel, the Overlook, over the winter, so they're going to take care of the hotel during the winter. There are all these stories going around about the hotel, about the owners, and a lot of gossip about horrible things that happen there. The son in the family has something called The Shining, which is basically that he can kind of read minds and he can kind of see into the future, and the book is basically about his visions. I just loved getting the perspective of the father, the mother, and the kid. They were all so enriching to the story. There's a lot of details in this book that you didn't get in the movie, but yeah, I do recommend this book. It was pretty good. Next, I read Winter by Marissa Meyer. This is the final book to the Lunar Chronicles, the fourth one. I think I enjoyed this book. It wasn't like an amazing book and it wasn't anything like extraordinary, but I think I really enjoyed it. This was a retelling of Snow White. Yeah, so you got to follow the main character, Winter. I really liked the main character in this book. I think that was definitely the best part about this book, is that I really enjoyed Winter and I enjoyed the story. The only thing that I didn't like was kind of the revolution aspects. I don't know why, but I don't like the underdog standing up for the bad people, you know, like making a revolution. I don't like reading those kind of books. I really don't know why. It's just kind of annoying and it drags on, and there was a moment of that in this book which I didn't like, but other than that, I thought it was a pretty good book. Next, I read Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Yeah, I really like this book. It's a classic. It's basically about this man. He loans a room in a house where there's a mother and a daughter living, and he falls in love with the daughter, which is 12 years old. This is a story which is very grotesque, and you get to follow the perspective of Humbert, which is the main character, the man. And the book is basically about pedophilia. So there was a lot of contradicting feelings in this book. I felt so cross with myself that I actually really enjoyed this book, but at the same time, the topics were so, yeah, grotesque, and so I kind of felt bad for loving this book so much that I did. But if you want a classic that is very memorable and good, then I highly recommend this book. Next, I read The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. This is a book that turns out it's a cartoon movie, and I didn't know about it. Apparently it's a terrible movie, but I actually really enjoyed the book. So the book is about the main character, which is a unicorn, and the unicorn has always lived in this forest. She is immortal, of course, and the forest that the unicorn lives in, it basically spreads beauty and the forest lives forever. But then these two hunters come into the forest and they start talking about the unicorns kind of being extinct, and so this unicorn becomes really scared that she is the last unicorn in the world, and she goes out of her forest that she's lived all her life to seek other unicorns. What I loved about this book is that it's like a fairy tale, you know, but it's for adults. It is so interesting the way it's kind of like, it's a little bit like Alice in Wonderland, where there's just parts where characters come and they leave like the next page and you're like, why is this character even in this book? Like, it's so insignificant, but at the same time it has so many good messages, and the book is just full of meanings that you can just read into it layer upon layer. But it's also like a fairy tale, like Once Upon a Time kind of story. So yeah, I highly recommend this book, and it's also really short. Next, I read A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. This is the second book in the Court of Thorns and Roses series. I love this book. Like, I absolutely like fucking adore this book. The first 100 pages, I was so pissed. I was feeling a lot. I hated the main character. I hated all the characters, but you know, like, I was so pissed off, you know, at everything. And then after that, like, the book just took a turn, and it just turned out to be so good. Like, I can't even explain what this book is about. So the first one, it's basically supposed to be based upon a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. It's very loose. The second one has nothing to do with it. But basically in this story or this in the world, there is fae and then there is humans, and humans are like slaves and lesser people, and fae have all these abilities, and within the fae realm you basically have high fae, lesser fae, higher fae, and there's a class system there as well. It has powers. It is very relationship based, and I have a lot of feelings about the main character because the main character is a lot like me. And that's why I kind of like don't like her, you know, because I see so much of myself in her and the side that I don't like about myself in her. And I think that's why I don't really like her either. But what I like about this book is that it kind of talks about sex, and not very often that it does that in young adults, and I think it's an important factor. If you want to see a talk about sex in books, Ariel Bissett has a lovely talk where she actually talks about it, and I highly recommend that video if you want to watch that. Highly recommend this series so far. The next book that I read was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I think this might be one of my favorite classics of all time. I loved this classic. I think it's really inspiring. Mary Shelley, she wrote this when she was 19, almost 200 years ago. So she was almost my age when she wrote this book, and she is almost born 200 years before me, and the book was published almost 200 years before now, which is crazy. The characters in this book were kind of conflicting, where I didn't really like them. It's basically about this man called Frankenstein who creates this monster which basically ruins his whole life, and it's about the dynamics between the monster and Frankenstein, and how their lives just change, both of them, so drastically. And Frankenstein is actually a kind person, kind of. It is a person, but the way society shaped him makes him a monster, and it's just so interesting. Love the ending. Highly recommend this classic. The next book that I read is Stardust by Neil Gaiman. First off, I just want to talk about the cover and this copy. So there is these editions coming out. They look like this. As you guys can see, they're kind of thinner, and the cover are done by someone called Robert McGinnis. He's doing a lot of remakes of Neil Gaiman's book covers, and I just bought them all because they are so incredibly good. I love these covers, love the size of them because I can hold them like this. Yes, this is a lovely story. This is kind of like similar genre as The Last Unicorn. In this book, you first get the story of the parents of the main character and how they met and who his actual mom is. So this is actually the story of him and his journey. So he asks her, what do I have to do to get your love? And she sees a fallen star and she says, fetch me that fallen star and I will be yours, or something like that. He sets off into this forest, which is supposed to be really dangerous, and the people in this village that he lives in has this huge wall, and people usually don't go out from it, and he does, and he crosses into the forest, and then it's kind of like a fairy tale where he meets all these people and creatures, and then this tree. It's also there's also this talking tree in this one, just like The Last Unicorn. And it's just a lovely story. I highly recommend it. Also really short, fairy tale. Yeah, it's also an adult book, which I really enjoyed. The only thing that I don't like about Neil Gaiman's books is that there's this certain disconnect to the plot. It's sometimes like there's plot after plot after plot where you don't really remember what happened before. Like every single time I try to explain Neil Gaiman's books to someone else, he has this lovely writing, like the type of writing you want to be able to write, but his stories are kind of hard to remember what happened and in what order things or events occurred in the book. So like now I don't really remember the book very solidly, and I think that's the only problem I really have with his books, but I do enjoy reading them while I am reading them. After this, we're entering the era of Booktubeathon, which was a 7-day long marathon that I participated in, and the first book I read was Fairest by Marissa Mayer. This is a Lunar Chronicles book, which is a companion novel, so this is a story about the villain in the Lunar Chronicles. So obviously you have to read those books before you read this one, but I enjoyed it. It's a really quick read. It was fun, it was interesting, but I think I wouldn't have liked it if I didn't read it as quickly as I do. And I'm a true believer in the fact that the quicker you read a book, the more you're gonna have this mesmerizing love over a book, in my opinion. So I think that was a big part of it as well, but it was good. Next, I read A Darker Shade of Magic by V. Schwab. I'm currently reading the 3rd book, and that's why I'm like so excited just like saying the name. This book is basically about this world where there are 4 different Londons. There's Grey London, Red London, White London, and Black London. Black London was basically consumed by magic, and so the other worlds cut off the borders from Black London to stay safe from magic. And so it's basically like dimensions in a way. And so the main character, Kel, he is an Antari. And Antari, they're very, very rare. And they have this type of magic that they can use called blood magic, which means that they use their own blood, like they cut themselves to be able to travel between different Londons. And so he does some smuggling, which is very, very illegal between the Londons, which makes him get in trouble because he smuggles something that is dark magic and he's not supposed to do so. And so there's a lot of relationship stuff going on. This whole series is just so amazing. I don't understand how this writing is so good. I think this must be my favorite fantasy series so far. I love this series. Like, I cannot explain how much I love this series. Please read this series. It's absolutely amazing. Next, I read The Little Prince by Tony de Saint-Exupéry. That's me trying to sound French. Yeah, so this is a classic, originally a French classic, but this is the translated version. It's about this little prince who is stranded on Earth, and he basically talks about his journey from his planet to Earth and how he stopped by all these other planets. And all these other planets, they're all these people, and they're a perfect reflection of adults, and there's so much wisdom in this. It's only 100 pages long, and I cried at the end. I don't understand how a book can do that. Highly recommend it. It has beautiful illustrations as well. Please do read it. Next, I read Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut. This is basically a classic centered around the bombings that happened in Dresden during World War II, I believe. Oh my god. Mead history is like crazy. Like, I know nothing about history, so I'm so sorry if I get this wrong. Yeah, to everyone. But this is basically about a main character who's able to jump through time. The way he lives his life is that sometimes he is in the body of when he is 40, and then he can be in the body when he's 20, and then he's in the body when he was 5. And he can just like jump through different points of his life, which I thought was really interesting. And this book has this whole philosophy on how to look at time. It's basically just about his story, his life, and when he dies, he isn't scared because he understands that life is a continuous line, like everything is happening at the same time. So when someone dies, they're still existing in this universe, but at a different point in time. Does that make sense to you? That's basically what this book is about, and I highly recommend it. I loved it. Next, I'm gonna talk about a comic. This is my first comic that I ever read. I read volume 1, 2, and 3 in this series, so I'll briefly mention it in the order that I actually read them. It is illustrated by Fiona Staples and written by Brian K. Vaughan, and I love this story. It's basically a fantasy story, or no, it's not fantasy, it's science fiction story about these 2 planets, or it's actually a planet and its moon who's been at war, and it's like a legit war, because the story is basically about a prisoner from the moon planet who's taken captive on the main planet, and one of the guards that are guarding the prison falls in love with the prisoner, and they escape. And yeah, basically they get this baby, and so it's the baby of those 2 who's telling the story about her life, basically, and how she grew up, about her parents. It is hilarious. This comic has no filters. There is like explicit drawn sex scenes in this. There's so much humor, which is insane, but I absolutely loved this so much. And creatures are amazing in this book. They're amazingly drawn. I've never been into comics, so if you want to start comics, if you're into fantasy, I highly recommend this series. Next, I read Carrie by Stephen King. I really like this book. It's basically about this girl who has a mother that has this religious mania, and she's so on her daughter, and it's amazing. Her daughter turned out to be like okay, but Carrie has telekinesis, and which means she can move objects. She's always been very bullied, and when she's stressed out, the telekinesis kind of acts outwards, and everyone knows the story of Carrie, but I have always thought this was a horror story since I've seen trailers of the movies and everything, but it's not really a horror story. It's about a very misunderstood girl who was put in the wrong situations. And yes, it's a little bit creepy at the end and the things that happen, but it's not a horror story. I wouldn't call it that, really. Yeah, but I recommend it. I thought it was really good. Next, I read A Gathering of Shadows by V. Schwab. It's the second book in the Darker Shade of Magic series. This is the book that kind of made me fall in love with the series. Then I read I Wrote This For You, which is a collection of poems I got from my best friend. It is also a photography book, so they also have like pretty cool pictures and everything. This is my first poetry book ever, and it actually got me in the mood to reading poetry. So I read 2 poetry books after this as well. So I'm really glad that I read this and got this. Thank you, Shifra, you're amazing. Next, I read Saga Volume 2. I mean, I might as well say I read, this is the 3rd one as well. So, all really great. I'm excited to continue. I have the 4th one as well. It's amazing. Next, I read Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. As you guys can see, this is also a Robert McGinnis cover book edition. Absolutely loved it. The cover is amazing. This book was recommended to me by my friend Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca. Loved the book. This is basically about a man who has a very ordinary life, and he has a horrible girlfriend. One day, he stumbles over a girl that's in the street, and when he picks her up and takes her home and takes care of her, he basically enters London Below. London Below is kind of where all the outcast and the people who fell through the cracks of London ended up. So it's like this city beneath the city, kind of. But everyone who's in London Below, they're not seen by everyone who's in London Above. That's just like the theory kind of the book. And then just like Stardust, Neil Gaiman has this way of just putting you in this journey. Like, it's just a series of events that happen, and it's really crazy. Like, it's absolutely crazy things that happen, the characters and everything, but it is a really funny book. My two favorite characters in this book are like the 2 like assassins or villains in this book. They were just so great. I love the way they're described, like the way they just like slurp like snails and shit. It's so gross, but at the same time, like it was a really funny book. I love that aspect of it. Now, the next 3 books, this is strange. Like, this is when I think that there's like some purpose in life, okay? Follow this. First, I read Percy Jackson and the Titan's Curse by Rick Riordan. This is the Percy Jackson and the Olympians series, I think that's what it's called. This is the 3rd book. I really enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed it, actually. I had some problems with the 2nd one because I really liked the first one, and the 2nd one was kind of like meh, and so I felt very uninspired to continue. But I did, and I'm really glad that I did, and I'm definitely gonna finish this series because this was a really good book. And it has a lot of Greek mythology and that kind of thing, and gods, and I love how they all bring it to life. Like, it was all real, and it all still is real. So, but this is what's weird, right? So I read this one, and then I read The Girl with All the Gifts, and this one has Greek mythology in it as well. And I was like, okay, that's strange, because this kind of awakens my mind. It reminded me of all the Greek mythology, and in this one, it's just like it was there too, so I recognized a lot of it, which was just so much fun. This was a book that was very misleading in the description, because it just says that this girl called Melanie basically has been kept in a cell for her whole life, and all she does is go to classes, and she's strapped to a wheelchair kind of, and then take the 2 to class, and her hands and feet and head is like, neck is bound to the chair, and that's all that happens her whole life, and she doesn't know anything else. That's all there says to her book. But let me tell you, this is a zombie apocalypse book, okay? Why doesn't that say on the back of the book? That is so annoying. I don't like zombie books, and I don't like disease books. So the book's concept is that there is this fungus that has been spreading over the whole world. The fungus travels through blood and spit, and so someone who has this fungus in their body bites another person, they, you know, become a zombie too, but they're not really zombies. They're like flesh-eating, like they're cannibals that rot, you know? And this book was just like a doom book. Like there was no way this book was gonna go like well, you know? And I don't like books where it's too much probability of them, you know, finding a cure to this or that kind of thing is so unlikely that it's like, what's the point of the book, you know? Like it's too unlikely. And it was really scary. I have to admit, it was a really scary book. I wasn't expecting it, but if you do like a worldwide epidemic kind of a thing, zombie kind of book, then do read it. I loved how you, in this apocalypse world, kind of, you got the perspective of the scientist, the little girl, which is the main character, and you got the military point of view, got the teacher point of view, and you got the regular citizen point of view, which I thought was really, really interesting in this book, and I think that's my favorite part about it. Next, I read Milk and Honey. Thank you so much, Robin, for giving me this book. He was really, really sweet about it. I was having a bad day, and he's like, Wilma, take this book. I actually bought it for myself, but, you know, like, you deserve it. Who wouldn't want a friend like that? This book was written by Rupi Kaur. I don't know how to say that. I'm so sorry. This is basically a poetry collection, and it's put into 4 different parts, which I really, really enjoyed. So the first part is the hurting, and then it is the loving, and then it is the breaking, and then it is the healing. So the poems are kind of telling the story as they go along, and it also has these amazing like illustrations in them that correlate the poems. The poems are very simple, they're not very complex to understand, you get the feeling very well across. And yeah, I really love this. Now this is the weird part about the Greek mythology, okay? This book, The Secret History by Donna Tartt, this is also kind of like a modern classic, by the way. This has Greek mythology in it, and it's so strange how these 3 books built up to this book, because I understood so much more in this book by reading the other books before I read this one. This one is about this guy who goes to college. At this college, there's this teacher who only teaches 5 students. He's the Greek teacher, and he really wants to take Greek class because this group is like closed off, and there's only 5 people, and those 5 people are not really friends with anyone else. And they're very snobby. It is very strange. These characters, like, there's a way, I can't really describe the atmosphere in this book, but there's a line in one of the classes that are in this Greek class that says, beauty is terror. The book is very terrible, like there's a lot of terror going on, you know, but it's described in a beautiful way. Donna Tartt's writing is absolutely amazing. I highly recommend this book if you want something that's just a great piece of literature, but very easy to understand. There's so much layers of psychology and history, hence the title, The Secret History, but it's about this murder that these 5 people and the main character commit that you already know from the beginning is going to happen, and then you get to get the story as to why this murder happened throughout the story, and that's basically what's going on. So highly recommend this book. It's a very unique read. The last book that I read recently is History Is All You Left Me by Adam Silvera. Hannah from A Clockwork Reader, she said that this was like a sob book, and I think at the time I just really, really want to sob to a book. I don't know if you guys are like that, but sometimes I just really, really feel like I just need to sob and read a book. And this was a great book for that. After 30 pages, I just sobbed for like a little while, and after 70, I sobbed for like 50 pages, like straight just reading and sobbing, which was great. This is about a story of a guy who loses his ex-boyfriend in an accident, like he dies, and this is the story of how he copes afterwards. He also tells about their history, what happened before his ex-boyfriend died, and that's kind of like how the story evolves. So every second chapter is called history, and every second chapter is like what's happening today. I don't know how to feel about this book. I'm very, very unsure about what to feel about this book, because even though it was good, I love the ending of it. There was a lot of things that I didn't like about it. I felt like the author was just trying to remind you of the title of the book, like constantly, like history is all you left me, like the word history was repeated way too much. Like, I get it, like I understand where the title's coming, like you don't need to remind me, you know, like it was a little bit too obvious. But what I liked about this book is the nerdiness both the main characters, or like the dead boyfriend and the main character, they're so nerdy. Like one is a Star Wars fan, the other is a Harry Potter fan, and then like there's all these other like stuff integrated into it and all their quirks and histories, and the main character is also struggling with OCD, which I can relate to so bad. I thought it was a pretty decent book. So you guys, that is everything for my summer reading wrap up. Oh my god, that was a lot. This is gonna be a heck of a long video, and if you made it this far in the video, congrats to you. I am really proud of you. Thank you for sticking along. I really appreciate it. This was nice. Like this talk. Tell me if you read any of these books and what you thought of them, and I hope you guys all have a really great day and had a great summer and are looking forward to this term, fall. So yeah, I hope you guys all have a really great day, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye!